By the late months of the First World War, Halifax, Nova Scotia had become one of the busiest and most strategically important ports in North America. Its deep harbor remained free of ice even during winter, making it a vital launching point for Allied convoys heading towards Europe. Everyday merchant ships, troop transports, supply vessels, and naval escorts passed through its channels in a controlled but crowded stream of wartime traffic. On the morning of December 6, 1917, that system was placed under enormous pressure. Vessels were rushing to meet schedules, and wartime secrecy often complicated normal safety rules. Ships carrying dangerous materials were discouraged from displaying the red warning flag that normally alerted others to keep clear, because commanders feared it would signal to German submarines lurking off the coast. That same morning, 2 ships approached the harbor's narrowest point, known locally as the Narrows. One was the Norwegian vessel SS Imo, riding high in the water because she carried no cargo. She was preparing to travel to New York to load relief supplies for civilians in Belgium and was already behind schedule. Pushing to make up time, she traveled faster than was recommended and found herself drifting toward the wrong side of the channel. The other ship entering the harbor was the French freighter SS Mont Blanc. She had arrived later than expected and moved cautiously into the port, sitting low in the water beneath the weight of her cargo. Unbeknownst to most people in Halifax that morning, the Mont Blanc carried one of the largest and most volatile assortments of explosives transported during the war. Her holds were packed with picric acid, trinitrotoluene, gun cotton, and barrels of highly flammable benzol stored on deck. In effect, she was a floating bomb navigating one of the busiest harbors in the world. Around mid-morning, both ships attempted to maneuver through the Narrows at the same time. Confusing whistle signals, misjudged turns, and pressure to move quickly created a chain of small mistakes. The Imo pressed forward at an unsafe speed while the Mont Blanc tried to adjust her course to avoid a collision. Their evasive actions, however, only brought them closer. When the 2 vessels finally met, the impact itself was slow and seemingly minor. The Imo struck the starboard bow of the Mont Blanc at little more than a crawl. Under normal circumstances, it would have been nothing more than an inconvenience, but that seemingly harmless scrape toppled several deck barrels of benzol, spilling the liquid across the ship. As the metal hulls grated together, sparks were created, igniting the vapors almost instantly. Flames burst across the deck, racing upward and feeding on the chemical fumes. The collision had lasted only a moment, but the result was catastrophic. A fire now burned aboard a ship filled with thousands of tons of wartime explosives, and with that spark, the countdown toward one of the most powerful non-nuclear explosions in human history had begun. For roughly 20 minutes after the collision, the SS Mont Blanc drifted slowly toward the Halifax shoreline, fully engulfed in flames. Thick black smoke poured upward, forming a towering column that could be seen across the city. The crew, fully aware of the deadly cargo below deck, escaped in lifeboats as soon as the fire took hold. They shouted warnings in French as they rowed furiously toward the Dartmouth side, but very few people understood what they were trying to say. To the residents of Halifax, the burning ship looked dramatic, but not dangerous. Many believed it was simply another wartime accident. People stepped outside to watch from porches, street corners, and the waterfront. Others gathered on the railway tracks near Pier 6, an area with factories, homes, and working-class neighborhoods built close to the water. Firefighters rushed toward the drifting vessel, unaware of the unimaginable threat simmering inside it. At precisely 9:04 and 35 seconds in the morning, the fire reached the Mont Blanc's explosive cargo. In that instant, the ship vanished in a blinding flash of white light. The explosion released a force equivalent to several thousand tons of trinitrotoluene, making it the largest human-made blast ever recorded up to that point in history. Temperatures near the epicenter soared to several thousand degrees, vaporizing the surrounding water and obliterating the vessel entirely. A shockwave burst outward faster than the speed of sound, flattening structures across the northern part of Halifax. Entire blocks of the Richmond district were crushed in seconds as homes, warehouses, and industrial buildings collapsed. Snapped telegraph poles and twisted railway tracks showed the incredible strength of the pressure wave, which tossed debris like paper and hurled heavy objects great distances. The flash of light shattered windows across the city, driving shards of glass into anyone who had stopped to watch from indoors. Thousands suffered facial and eye injuries. a tragic result of the momentary curiosity that led so many to look out their windows at the burning ship. The sound of the blast carried far across the region, reaching communities well beyond the harbor. The explosion also displaced an enormous volume of seawater. For a brief moment, the harbor floor was exposed. Then the water surged back with violent force, forming a powerful tsunami that crashed against both shores. The wave rose high above the normal tide line, smashing buildings weakened by the blast and sweeping debris and victims into the harbor. On the opposite side of the water, an indigenous Mi'kmaq community that had lived along the shoreline for generations was destroyed, its homes carried away by the churning surge. In less than a single minute, Halifax had been transformed. A fire had become an explosion, and the explosion had unleashed a tidal wave. What remained was a shattered port city, struggling to comprehend the scale of what had just occurred. When the thunder of the blast faded, Halifax was left in an eerie, dust-filled silence. Entire neighborhoods near the waterfront had been reduced to splintered wood, broken bricks, and tangled metal. Those who survived the shockwave emerged into streets that no longer resembled the city they had known only moments before. Fires burned unchecked throughout the ruins, fed by collapsed homes, burst fuel lines, and overturned stoves. Smoke hung heavy over the harbor as survivors stumbled through debris, calling out for missing family members. Across the city, thousands were injured, many were dazed, wandering with cuts, burns, and shattered limbs, trying to find help in a landscape where many doctors' offices and medical buildings had been destroyed. Schools, churches, and private homes that remained standing were quickly transformed into makeshift aid stations. Tables became operating surfaces, and blankets were used as bandages, while the injured poured in faster than anyone could treat them. One of the earliest acts of heroism came from a railway dispatcher named Vince Coleman, who had stayed at his telegraph post, even after learning that an explosives-laden ship was burning nearby. Before the blast reached him, he tapped out a final urgent message, warning an incoming passenger train to stop. His quick thinking saved hundreds of lives, though he did not survive the explosion himself. His final transmission would later become one of the defining moments of courage in the disaster. In the devastated Richmond district, soldiers and civilians clawed through collapsed houses with their hands, searching desperately for voices under the rubble. Railway workers used whatever equipment remained functional to pull wreckage aside. Many people trapped in the ruins called out for help, but the scale of destruction made it impossible to reach everyone quickly enough. The mixture of broken water mains and smoldering fires created dangerous conditions for rescuers, who often had to work cautiously to avoid further collapses. Communication lines throughout the city were crippled, leaving Halifax isolated in the crucial first hours. It took time for word of the catastrophe to reach surrounding towns, but once the enormity of the situation was understood, aid began to mobilize. Military bases in the region were among the first to respond, dispatching troops to help with rescue, fire suppression, and crowd control. Their arrival brought a brief sense of order to areas where chaos had taken hold. As daylight faded, the city grew even more perilous. The cold December temperatures began to settle in, and thousands of residents, injured, displaced, or unable to find shelter, faced a long, freezing night. With many homes destroyed and fires still burning, survivors gathered wherever walls still stood, huddling together for warmth. Volunteers distributed whatever blankets, candles, and supplies they could find, but the needs of the population were far greater than what the city alone could provide. Despite the devastation, small moments of determination emerged throughout the night. Families reunited against the odds. Soldiers carried injured children through the debris. Neighbors shared food, water, and clothing with those who had lost everything. Though Halifax was broken, its people refused to be defeated in the first dark hours after the catastrophe. In the hours following the Halifax explosion, the city faced a dual crisis. Rescue and recovery were complicated by the arrival of a massive winter storm the very next day. Snow fell heavily, accumulating over 16 inches in some districts, covering the shattered streets and ruins of the waterfront. The storm slowed search efforts, made transportation nearly impossible, and exposed survivors to dangerously low temperatures. Hypothermia became a real threat, and many who had survived the initial blast succumbed to the cold before they could be reached. Despite these harsh conditions, relief began arriving from across Canada and the United States. The first significant aid came from Boston, Massachusetts, which dispatched a special relief train carrying doctors, nurses, blankets, food, and medical supplies. The train traveled overnight, arriving into a city buried under snow and debris, relief workers immediately set up triage stations in whatever buildings remained standing, including schools, warehouses, and makeshift tents. Their work provided critical care to thousands, performing surgeries and stabilizing severe injuries that local resources could not handle alone. Other communities in Nova Scotia and beyond followed quickly. Volunteers and military personnel assisted in clearing debris, reinforcing structures at risk of collapse, and distributing food to the homeless. Temporary shelters were established in churches, factories, and halls, accommodating tens of thousands of displaced residents. In total, over 25,000 people were left without adequate shelter, many of whom spent the first nights in extreme cold while awaiting help. Amid the chaos, extraordinary acts of heroism were recorded. Civilians, soldiers, and emergency workers risked their lives to rescue people trapped under rubble, carrying children and the injured to safety. Hospitals operated around the clock with makeshift operating rooms set up in classrooms and offices. The unprecedented number of eye injuries and burns presented unique challenges, prompting medical teams to develop rapid triage methods for treating large-scale trauma. The disaster forged enduring bonds between Halifax and its supporters. In recognition of Boston's rapid and effective response, the city of Halifax sent a Christmas tree to Boston the following year as a gesture of gratitude. That tradition continued and evolved, eventually becoming an annual event that lasts to this day. The aid not only saved lives, but also established a model for coordinated international disaster response in North America. By the end of the first week, the combination of relief efforts and the bravery of ordinary citizens began to stabilize the city. Though thousands remained homeless and the devastation was immense, the quick arrival of help prevented even greater loss of life. The lessons learned in those critical hours influenced future emergency planning, hospital preparedness, and the handling of dangerous cargo in harbors across the world. In the months and years following the Halifax explosion, the city faced the monumental task of rebuilding. Entire neighborhoods had been obliterated, leaving tens of thousands without homes. Urban planners and engineers seized the opportunity to redesign the waterfront, creating wider streets, fire breaks, and more organized layouts to prevent similar catastrophes. One of the most notable projects was the Hydrostone District, constructed with reinforced concrete and designed to provide safer, more fire-resistant housing for working-class families. This area became a model for modern public housing in Canada and remains a historic district today. The medical community also saw lasting effects. The sheer number of injuries, particularly eye trauma, prompted advances in ophthalmology. Hospitals refined emergency triage protocols, and the experience led to improvements in trauma care, pediatric treatment, and disaster medicine. The Canadian National Institute for the Blind, founded in response to the explosion's devastation, provided support and resources for victims who lost their sight, shaping disability services for decades. Socially, the explosion fostered remarkable solidarity. Volunteers and citizens who survived the disaster contributed to relief efforts, creating an enduring spirit of community resilience. The bond between Halifax and Boston, established during the initial relief, became an annual tradition with a Christmas tree exchange, symbolizing gratitude and ongoing friendship born from tragedy. Over time, memorials were erected, and the event became a key part of Halifax's historical narrative, educating future generations about the consequences of industrial hazards and human error. Economically, Halifax faced significant challenges. The port, a vital hub for trade and wartime supplies, required extensive reconstruction. Shipping resumed gradually, but the waterfront's devastation highlighted the importance of improved safety regulations for the transport of explosives. Maritime laws were revised, introducing stricter protocols for harbor traffic, labeling of dangerous cargo, and emergency preparedness. These measures reduced the risk of similar catastrophes in Canadian ports and influenced international maritime safety standards. Despite the unimaginable destruction, Halifax emerged stronger and more resilient. The disaster demonstrated both the destructive power of human error combined with volatile materials and the extraordinary capacity for recovery, ingenuity, and compassion. Over 100 years later, the Halifax explosion stands as a stark reminder of how quickly life can change, and how communities can rebuild, adapt, and honor the memory of those lost in moments of unimaginable catastrophe.